Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay up to date and help the channel grow. We really appreciate you spending some time with us today. And now, on with the show. You are listening to the Narrated, Not the Popular Opinion with the one and only Gray. Greetings, opinion nerds. It is I, the one they call Gray, and we're stepping into the ring for round 3 in the Creed franchise with the aptly titled Creed 3 on this random act of opinion coming up right now. You know, nothing is more frustrating than the feeling that good could have been great, opinion nerds. There is a special kind of frustration that comes along with being a film fan that we will all eventually have to face. You've just seen a film, and as the credits roll, you have a big smile on your face. You know you just had a good time at the pictures. It isn't until later, maybe the next day, maybe that night, maybe even on the car ride home, that you get to thinking, hey, hold on a second. It isn't that you're trying to break the film, you aren't looking for problems, but somewhere in the back of your mind, you can't shake the feeling of something being just kind of off about it. Maybe something in the plotting doesn't feel as if it quite lines up right, or maybe there's a feeling that something important to the story is missing. It doesn't necessarily hurt the movie or lessen its experience, not significantly anyway, but it just sits there uncomfortably like a gnat buzzing in your ear that gets louder the further from the movie you get. And try as hard as you might, the more you focus on it, the harder it gets to make the noise go away. In Creed 3, after achieving all his dreams and retiring the undisputed champ, Adonis Creed is confronted by the past he left behind. Has the champ got one last fight in him, or is guilt the one thing he can't punch his way out of? Directed by Michael B. Jordan from a screenplay by Keenan Coogler, Zach Balin, and Ryan Coogler, the film stars Michael B. Jordan, Jonathan Majors, Tessa Thompson, and Felicia Rashad. Now keep your guard up, you never know if a spoiler is coming at you. The Rocky series not only made writer, director, and star Sylvester Stallone a household name, it arguably elevated the genre of sports drama in the eyes of the public. Sports movies are rarely just about sports, and from 1977 to 2006, we watched Stallone's everyman guy from the block punch his way through life and loss. In 2015, Stallone helped pass the torch on to director Ryan Coogler and star Michael B. Jordan as Adonis Creed, son of Rocky rival turned spiritual brother Apollo Creed, to carry on the legacy of the human capacity to get knocked down and still come back swinging. The first film in the series, aptly titled Creed, focused around the dual stories of Adonis's fight to prove he wasn't a mistake. Adonis was born of an act of adultery, while Rocky, suffering from illness, has to decide if there's anything in life left to fight for. The 1-2 punch of drama was a big success and paved the way for Stephen Caple Jr. to step behind the camera for Creed 2, which saw Adonis and Rocky facing down their shared past with the return of Dolph Lundgren as Rocky IV's Ivan Drago. With son Victor in tow, Drago looks to reclaim some measure of respect after being tossed aside by his country and his wife following his defeat in that film. Drago was the man responsible for the death of Adonis's father, and his ultimate defeat at Rocky's hands sent his life into a spiral that sucked his son down with him. Though the twisted, multi-layered drama felt less satisfying than the previous film, mostly because its reliance on Rocky IV felt gimmicky, it was still a satisfying enough experience that audiences were interested in seeing where the story went next. Creed 3 looks to build on the Adonis character by reaching into its past for a new story to tell, and it's going to be telling it without Stallone's Rocky, as the franchise star has chosen to step away from the series that made his career. The film finds Adonis has put his boxing days behind him when the arrival of an old friend after 18 years in prison brings back a flood of memories that Donnie has to resolve, including physical abuse and the guilt of abandoning his friend after he was incarcerated. The flip side of this story, from the perspective of Jonathan Majors' Diamond Dame Anderson, is the anger at watching someone you feel abandon you achieve all the things you wanted in life and deciding that you'll get what you feel the world owes you no matter what. Most important to the story among the film's themes is the need for mental health management and dealing with emotional trauma, a conversation that's becoming critically important, especially among men. Like his pugilistic predecessor, Stallone, Creed 3 will see series star Michael B. Jordan take the reins behind the scenes. As a first-time director, stepping behind the camera in an established franchise can be tricky. On the one hand, you're working with a team of producers and crews within a set of stylistic guidelines that gives you a model to follow. It's not exactly the same as shooting an episode of TV, but depending on the producers involved, it can be largely similar. So while you're most definitely responsible for all the day-to-day work a director has to do, unless you're being given freedom to reinvent the wheel, the pressure of that is relieved by having so much of the development of the film's narrative approach, look, and feel established for you. Needless to say, it can make the process much easier than developing a project from the ground up. The counterpunch is that you're never really making your movie. You're playing in someone else's sandbox, and in order to do that, you have to, for good or for ill, compromise on your own creative impulses in order to maintain the consistency that a series or franchise often demand. Following in the footsteps of Creed 2, Jordan teams with cinematographer Kramer Morgenthau to create a film that is both dramatically and photographically consistent with the previous entry. While not seeming to have a particular stylistic approach to capturing the dramatic storytelling, the anime influences director Jordan has openly discussed in interviews is easily apparent if you know what you're looking for. There have been a lot of boxing films over the years that have pushed the realism and drama of the in-ring action to extremes, making it difficult to find a new angle to pursue. Director Jordan brings some interesting new tricks into that fight that, while a stark departure from the series' attempt to render the sweet science as close to reality as dramatically possible, is more high energy with its rat-a-tat flurries of punches and counters skewing a little more animated. It's stylized and visually engaging, but it does take the series in a slightly different direction than past entries. And while Jordan's Southpaw approach has a couple of cool tricks, they are used somewhat inconsistently and, in the case of the title bout, used to great aesthetic but not dramatic ends. While it's bold of the young director to evoke the dramatic flair of anime in the pugilistic combat, something that has gained him praise with a younger segment of critics who grew up on those animated imports, the rest of the film is pretty paint-by-numbers drama. It does the job of managing the emotional stakes and upping the tension as the film progresses, but the drama lacks a certain amount of weight with its telegraphed twists and low emotional stakes. This starts with the screenplay, but as both director and executive producer, it's Jordan's job to manage and shape what ultimately ends up on the screen. So as weak as the screenplay may have been, Jordan's lack of experience may not have properly prepared him for the role of final arbiter of the material. It's clear he had a vision for how he wanted to approach the boxing, and that counts for a lot. But without a real vision for the film's total experience, the drama just feels like it's on rails heading towards an inevitable and predictable outcome. As much as I admire the film, there are aspects of the storytelling that frustrate me. Story elements like Donnie's reaction to finding out his daughter Amara is being bullied and wife Bianca discussing getting help to manage her frustration over stepping away from her performing career to preserve her hearing are meant to contribute to the side of the story that is Donnie finally processing his own trauma. However, these elements play no part in Donnie resolving his relationship with Dame and his feelings of guilt, as the film ultimately decides to treat them as separate issues. And because of this, the film seems to struggle, in my opinion, to find a compelling dramatic reason for the finale fight to happen. What it lands on, Dame insulting Donnie in the press and calling him a coward, doesn't strike me as strong enough for the physically embattled retired fighter. His trainers rattle off a list of injuries that end up being totally irrelevant, to risk potentially getting beaten to death over. Beating Dame won't resolve Donnie of either his trauma or his stated guilt over abandoning him. And as the movie never sets up an acknowledged, unanswered question about which of them is the better fighter, the best Dame can hope for is to beat an injured ex-boxer 3 years past his peak just to keep what he already has. There's nothing for him to win, and if he loses everything. Donnie isn't pushed into this fight out of necessity or even as a last resort. He never asks Dame for forgiveness only to be rejected. He never tries to use the information he has about Dame's involvement in the assault that opened up the title shot he manipulated Donnie into giving him. Donnie never makes an issue of Dame's dirty fighting tactics in a way that threatens to harm his title victory, pushing him to retaliate in a way that actually presents a threat to Donnie's family, his life, or his livelihood. And despite Dame's threats that he's coming for it all and Donnie's statement that he's never going to stop, Dame doesn't actually do anything, nor is it ever suggested there is anything he can do to hurt Donnie in any tangible way. There's a clear line of narrative logic to draw from Donnie's initial trauma to the assault on his tormentor, which then leads to Dame pulling a gun to protect his friend and getting arrested, which then leads to Donnie's guilt at leaving his friend and forgetting about him. That guilt is what leads Donnie to giving Dame what he wants despite others telling him it's a bad idea, which then leads to the truth of everything being revealed to Donnie. But the road between that revelation and Donnie actually getting into the ring with Dame is paved only with a handful of insults and no clear indication of how winning a boxing match resolves anything. The Rocky series has always been about using boxing as a metaphor for battling with yourself. During their initial training with one another, Rocky tells Donnie that the person in the mirror is his real opponent and that the other guy in the ring is just in the way. It feels like the movie, for some reason, danced around the idea that the real issue is not that Donnie feels guilty for abandoning Dame after he's arrested, but that he blames himself for Dame getting locked up in the first place because, as a victim of abuse, he couldn't control his anger. All the elements of the storytelling, from how he deals with Amara being bullied, to Bianca telling him he has to deal with whatever he won't talk about, to the resentment Dame holds against him, seem to point to that as being the real problem, and it doesn't seem, to me, as if the film actually addresses it. Likewise, if Dame isn't holding the fact that he lost 18 years of his life because of Donnie's actions against him, then why does he need to hurt him after getting what he wants? It's all right there, but the movie chooses not to thread the storytelling together in a way that roots it in this core dramatic issue. To follow that thread to a logical conclusion, Donnie would need to be absolved of his guilt by first acknowledging it, and then by asking forgiveness from Dame in whatever form that takes. Dame would then need to either choose to stop blaming Donnie for what he lost in his life by understanding Donnie's perspective and acknowledging it was his own choices that landed him in prison, or, if one chooses not to have Dame move past that with him, Donnie will need to come to the conclusion that self-forgiveness is enough. I don't see how any of that is accomplished in the spectacular way the film wants it to be. In my opinion, if there was going to be any fight, it needed to be just between the two of them. No cameras, no audience, nothing sanctioned with titles on the line, and it needed to be a fight that Donnie was more or less forced into, something far more intimate than a big Showtime boxing event. The movie tries to present a variation on this, but because Donnie never acknowledges the underlying cause of his guilt and never seeks absolution from Dame, the end result of Donnie beating Dame and taking away his dreams, only to have them essentially shake hands and go their separate ways, was an ending I found deeply unsatisfying. This is by no means a statement that this is a bad movie. On the surface, it gets you where you need to go in an engaging enough manner, and I admire the creative choices Jordan made as a director. My dissatisfaction with the film's underlying storytelling should not be read as a wholesale condemnation of the film experience. If you find what's presented to be enough to satisfy you, that's all that really matters. Creed 3 is, at times and quite often, an entertaining and engaging film, and I did find myself invested in seeing how the story would ultimately resolve. But as the film moved into the final stretch, I just couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, and it took the writing of this piece to really understand what I believe that was. Were I not a person who chooses to engage in a more concerned examination of movies, I would likely chalk this up to a film that's good but not great. A movie that almost gets there but just doesn't quite seem to go the distance. That is, by far, one of the most heartbreaking aspects of being a film fan. To look at a film that you know has a lot going for it on many different levels, but ultimately coming away with a feeling of dissatisfaction you can't quite explain. These are not always insurmountable issues, and they can sometimes be resolved with repeat viewings, but even if the film turns out to be one of your favorites down the road, nothing can really take the sting off of that first encounter. Watching films isn't quite like getting into a fight, but if you choose to engage, you still run the risk of coming away with a few lumps. But like any good fighter, all we can do is pick ourselves up off the mat and get ready to go another round. This has been the Narrated, Not the Popular Opinion. As always, I have been Gray, and if you like what you heard, you can leave a tip at our Ko-Fi page at ko-fi.com/notthepopularopinion. You can follow us on Twitter at @only_Gray, and don't forget our main page at notthepopularopinion.wordpress.com, where you'll find more great articles just like this. Thanks again for listening, and remember, if you're as good to others as you are to yourself, we might just make it through this mess. See ya.